Oh my
A disease
gosh, it's
primary. Yeah,
3:30.
disease primary.
As people are entering into the room, we see there's still people coming in, but you are joining a webinar on talking about color. And our presenters today are Angela de Ramos from Salinas, Francisco Ortiz from West Contra Costa County, AKA Richmond, and Vanessa Robinson from CSU Monterey Bay. They are going to be taking us through a very enlightening presentation today, and you will be wowed by all the colors in the slides and all the information that they're going to be providing you. My name is Marlene Fong, and I'm with the IPD department, and I'm surrounded by my colleagues helping with the technical aspects of this webinar. My colleague Brian Guerrero in Region 3, and Karen Taylor in Region 4, and I'm in Region 2. So before we get started, there was supposed to have been a slide up there about Prop 15 and schools and communities first. And I do want to put a plug for this proposition that's going to bring money to education, where the people who earn the highest amount of money, like over in the millions and billions of dollars, that they would be taxed at a 0.5% higher, so that some of the money could be used for education. So that makes sure that you see it on the ballot and vote yes. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Angela, who's going to kick all this off. And if you see script running across the bottom of the screen, we are also being closed captioned, and this is being recorded for future purposes. So thanks again, everyone.
I'll take it away from there. Hi, I am Angela de Ramos. I am a 5th grade teacher in Salinas. And Salinas is the land of the Salinans, which is my, the first peoples who were on this land. So I'd like to acknowledge them. And I think, and Vanessa lives in Salinas too, so I'm gonna do our land acknowledgement from both of us. And Francisco, you wanna do your land acknowledgement? Where are you from and who are the first peoples in your land?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Francisco Ortiz. I'm a 5th grade teacher representing the United Teachers of Richmond. And today I come to you from my home in Vallejo, California, which is and always will be the ancestral land of the Karkin, Ohlone, and of the Patwin peoples, whose legacy of resistance against cultural and physical genocide will always be here.
And the land acknowledgement is something that we always like to kick off of, especially when we're doing this anti-racist work, because, and it's very appropriate for today's subject, which is really about disrupting racial narratives. So the traditional, you know, the textbook or the traditional textbook version of Native Americans is like, you know, we had corn and we had turkey and everyone lived happily ever after. And that's a kind of a narrative, but we know the reality of it, there's a different narrative. And so part of our job as anti-racist teachers is to disrupt the narratives. So with that, I'm going to introduce my 2 colleagues, Francisco and Vanessa. And I want to talk about your racial narratives, and especially when do those narratives, I gave an example of like a textbook thing that kids learn. When was a time that a racial narrative sort of impacted you as a student, your students, you know, teachers, you know, in our work in the classroom? When have racial narratives been a thing? And it's your turn.
Okay, I know, that means it's me, right? Okay, so my name is Vanessa Robinson. I am a 5th grade teacher actually in Greenfield Union School District. My email is alumni CSUMB though, so I know where that came from. And as far as racial narrative work in the classroom and some ways that it plays out in the classroom, I mean, for myself, growing up, I'm biracial. So my mom's white, my dad's black, but you know, it's always kind of been that thing like, what are you? Or when I was in school as a student, you know, other kids, why is your mom white and you're black? You know, even not understanding multiracial narratives, right? Which led to a lot of problems for me growing up in identity. Like, who am I supposed to be? Which way am I supposed to act? How does the world perceive me? And how am I supposed to fit some role, especially being multiracial? And then just moving throughout that and finding my own, I guess, creating my own image, which, to be honest, came when I had more friends that were biracial, which shouldn't be that, you know, you shouldn't have to find another group of you to figure out who you are. But we know that society wants to force you in a box, and being biracial, there really is no box, not even on an application. So with my students, it's always near and dear for me because I teach in South Monterey County, which is predominantly Hispanic. So again, it's outside of, you know, my own racial narratives, but it adds an even more personal component to it for me, because I want to make sure that my students never feel like they have to fit inside of a box. And, you know, celebrating multiple cultures is something that's rare in isolated towns like South Monterey County or Gonzales or Greenfield. It is predominantly not just one ethnicity at the school, but within the city as well. So even throughout the city, a lot of the times the students have no firsthand experience to outside cultures, not even, you know, passing somebody on the street, not through the grocery stores, and especially not in their schools. And there's a story that I remember of a student who got outside of the city maybe more often than the other kids. He had family that lived in Salinas, so he had exposure to, you know, other cultures. And this student was Hispanic, but you know, he loved Jordan, Michael Jordan. He was born on the 23rd of August, and so I think the number 23 just became really special for him. And there were times when talking, you know, about African-American culture outside of February, right? Because we got to talk about it all year long, that he started to find some just like relationship and identity through characters in books, and started to identify that the things that he had in common with the characters who were African-American were outside of just shoes. Because he would tell me that there were things kids would tell him at school, like, oh, you think you're black, or you try to act black. And it was so disheartening for me, especially because I'm not Hispanic who appreciates culture of blacks. I am black, but at the same time, I'm half white. And that was always challenged for me as well, even within my own, you know, family dynamics or within my neighborhoods. And so it just became really clear for me how powerful that was for him, that representation of himself and other people in books, just having a common understanding about things, broke the idea that in order to wear a certain pair of shoes or to like a certain basketball player, you've got to be a certain race. Or that if he's not that race, that he can't enjoy those things. So it just speaks to the power that, you know, this work can do in dismantling the narratives that society will force our students into accepting about themselves, and also extending like the olive branch of, you can go ahead and appreciate other cultures and participate in those things as well, because other cultures are multifaceted. They're not one dimension.
And I think you hit on a couple things. So one thing about Vanessa in my area, she mentioned that it's a homogeneous community. So we have segregation. It's just alive and fine. It's not supposed to be legal, but for other reasons, economic and otherwise, we are largely segregated in Salinas. And so she is often the only Black woman they will meet, and I am often the only Asian teacher my students will encounter. So, you know, I think one of the things that you touched on is what you look like and who your community is. There's some recognition. Whereas Francisco, you have a slightly different, because you grew up, well, I'll let you tell your story of your racial narratives and when they collide with your reality.
Great, thank you, Angela. So yeah, you know, with my personal experience, I come from a home of, you know, Mexican and Salvadoreño immigrants. Both of my parents did not finish primary education in their home countries because of abject poverty and civil war, and just the necessity to survive. And so I did not have a lot of academic role models growing up. Two of my elder brothers and sisters did not complete their high school education. And, you know, I didn't have any educators who looked like me growing up. And so it wasn't, you know, it wasn't until high school where I had two two teachers, one a Black male and a Latinx male, who took me under their wing for one semester because I was on the verge of getting kicked out of school. I held my first gun in French class in seventh grade, and so I could have gone either way. I didn't really have a lot of role models. And so it was the first time in high school when these two educators really saw an academic potential in me and believed in me that I actually began to see myself as an academic and began to see myself as a different or having a different possibility or a different outlook than what I thought was already set in stone for me. And so I think that it's very important for students to be able to see themselves not only in the curriculum, from the books that they read and from learning from different perspectives, but also having exposure to educators who not only look like them, but who look like other peoples from all throughout the world, so that students can not only have different examples of role models and people who are in positions of influence to help support them, but also to help them understand that there is a different narrative and that they can write their own narrative as well. And so that's something that I have been, really fortunate to be one of the only Latinx male teachers at my site. Luckily, 3 years ago, we were able to get another second grade Latinx male teacher. So now we have two male Latino teachers with an 80% Latinx student population. So we're able to somewhat reflect our student population, but also be another resource for students who may not see those educational figures in their lives.
So we invite you to really think through. I know some of you started your school today. I started last week. Francisco and Vanessa, so you're starting like this next week and then the week after. So we're all starting school. And I really invite you to think about what you look like and what your racial narratives are has to be part of the discussion when you're teaching about racial narratives, because it's the books that we're heading into books because as our other panelists said, if we're living in homogeneous societies and they never have any interaction with others, they always stay the other. So bringing books in and bringing a wide representation is a way of inviting the world in when we are so provincial in our little communities and very isolated, insular. And at the same time, they're getting these racial narratives that Asians eat bats and, spread corona, or, we're all good at math and science. I mean, those are sort of the racial narratives that have been put on my community or what have you. So we want to use these books as an entry point. But I think the interesting thing that Francisco and Vanessa's story, I think Vanessa, you particularly said, you didn't have any you didn't have a narrative of your own and you had to make it up. And the reality is these are not inherent narratives for any of us. We have our own reality. And I think that's kind of our starting point. We use the books to discuss it, but it has to start with us, who we are, what we represent, and what we believe in. And that's true for our students too. So as we were thinking about our activities for this, it's the beginning of the year. So we started thinking about the typical activities that we do in our classrooms to enter this work. And they are at the beginning of the year centered about your own narrative, your lived experience, because that's separate from a racial narrative. Do they collide? Absolutely. And that's where we want them to feel, that's where we want to bring them. But the first steps are finding your own narrative. And it's perfect because it's perfect for the beginning of the year. So we were actually like freaking out about what we're going to do, like all of you, about like, oh my God, we're doing this, and we're doing this in a new way, a new format, digital learning, like all these activities that we've done with our books, we're having to also rethink our tools and how we're going to do it. So, disclaimer, we haven't done these things in the classroom virtually because this is our first experience launching a year virtually, but I actually started my school, so I can actually say what happened today because I did the virtual scavenger hunt. So we're going to launch into the beginning. You know, we just started brainstorming some activities that you could do when you're starting to do this work, something useful that you can do tomorrow or next week or when you start. So Francisco and I were talking about the virtual scavenger hunt. As you know, we've participated in a couple PDs where it launched, and it's fun, and it's, you know, gets the kids out. And you want to take over here from Francisco and talk that part, and I'll explain what this is later.
So I think that what's really important to start at the beginning of the year is building community. And so I think that a lot of students, at least in my personal experience, there was a little bit of shyness with, you know, exposing yourself in a camera. And so I think that one way that we can begin to, as an entry point, to begin to ease students into, one, getting more comfortable and sharing a little bit about themselves, to just have a layered activity with this virtual scavenger hunt. And the first layer is just having kind of like in a riddle format, trying to find different household items that we could typical or that would be, you know, usually found around a house. So like toothbrushes, pillows, a favorite drink or a condiment, some electronic item or a favorite electronic they might have in their personal space. We could do it in a riddle form, and, you know, the videos could be off, but the one in is like, okay, so once you have your item, you have to turn your video on, you got to show it in your camera, and then you can turn it away. And so it'll lower the pressure on a student to continue to just stay on the camera for so long, and we'll get them moving. And then on a different way, or in a more in-depth way, which you could do for the second layer, is what you can do is you can start to deepen the types of items that are more personal and that have more of a significance for the students. So something that is on their wall, it could be a picture, it could be a piece of art, it could be something that belongs to the family, or something that they play with and do for fun. Okay.
And we actually really discussed this. You know, Vanessa brought up the good point that, you know, what we were talking about showing outside, and we actually kind of scaffolded it. I mean, we really thought about like, what are universals? And then we started crafting into what is not, because when we're talking about racial narratives or just knowing people's differences, because that's also part of this work, is appreciating what's the same about us as humans and what's different and all the beauty and the difference. So we actually really crafted it. And we were talking about games, and it was like, Vanessa, you know, you were explaining about the games. About you want to explain?
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, it's just all of these, you know, this is why collective work is so much better than working in isolation though too, right? Because multiple sets of eyes and experiences really craft your impact on your students in your classroom too. So I can never stress that enough, that collaborate as much as you can with other educators and be open-minded. And just talking about grab a game, what that might mean for a student, you know, and just thinking of the populations that we serve. My students might not have games at home, and then we kind of said, well, everybody does something for fun. Well, drawing might not be a game for a student, but it might be the only outlet that they have when homework's done. It might be a piece of paper and a box of crayons, and that's what free time is for them, versus a, you know, Uno 2 or Dos, the new one, right? Or the kids are at Target every weekend buying new card games. And to touch on also the idea of showing outside, what that does for a narrative too is that we don't only have ideas about ourselves based on what the world tells us, but also how we see the world. So kind of like having students, maybe if they don't want to show where they live or what circumstances they're in, or they don't want to show their front yard or their backyard, or they may not have one, allowing them to explain what they see when they look outside, what's outside your back window. Because a lot of the times with our students is it won't be the most horrifying part of what they see outside. A lot of the times it's like the peaceful things or the things that they've created around them that are important to them. I had a student this year who had a really small house, right? And for me, seeing it on camera was like, whoa, and there's 9 people living there. Very typical. But what she was so happy about and most proud about was that they have a huge backyard. There's an old truck in their backyard. She goes and sits in it for quiet time. And there was nothing wrong about that for her. But if we start to open those things up for other people's opinion and dialogue, and we start to do it in a way where we're not being receptive to a student's reality, is where we can start to damage not only how they see themselves, but how they think the world sees them, how they see the world. So allowing your students to just describe their life and their settings and their circumstances in their own words, not only are you getting a huge lesson into how to educate them better, you're allowing them to create their own narrative, right? You're allowing them to create their own story and to own their own story and to understand their story. And that's where you come in. And this really important part is helping that become beautiful for them. And then giving them all, you know, we may know as educators and professionals that that's like not the ideal living circumstances, but what do you do next? What are your next steps? How do you craft that student's journey to maybe breaking that cycle of poverty for her without her understanding that her life is subpar, right? So all of those things, allowing student agency and voice and letting them just drive a lot of this work, and you using your expertise, right? Not to tell them or assimilate them or push something on them, but to help them just craft their own story is so powerful. It seems so little, but what you do and don't say is actually really important when it comes to doing this work.
And thinking through the trajectory and opening it up. I mean, yeah, like Vanessa said, us crafting it together as we were thinking, you know, are we really going to make them be on camera? Are we really going to make, you know, we said kitchen table, and it was like, but we have students who don't have a kitchen, who don't have a table. They may be sharing a space in one room. So being aware of the realities has to be part of this work. But you can stick to pretty safe things like toothbrush and pillow. And then we moved into parts where we started really thinking of like what would be different that we could start talking about. And so when I did today, I launched it today, and we only did a few. We didn't do the whole list, but I did pick one. So we came up with as Francisco said, the layered activity. On when you start to see, you might, you know, they're kind of tweaked for seeing what cultural or family differences is, because that can become a talking point for celebrating even differences within the classroom. Even in a homogeneous group, you know, and I made sure I said, what's something that you put on food to make it taste good? So people brought tapatio and Valentina, and I brought my packet of soy sauce. I brought pepper. People brought ketchup. So, you know, and we kind of noted there was like lots of different things, but it was an entry point into seeing different things on the wall. Do you want to add anything, Francisco or Vanessa, before I move on to the next activities?
Yeah, because one really important piece about this was, since it's the beginning of the year, we don't know this group of kids. And so all these insights that I had about stories that came about during the spring that's privileged information. At this point, we don't know a lot about our students coming in. So just knowing that if you start with layer one, simple personal items, and that might be something maybe that's really boring for your students, because again, depending on grade level, moving into level two, and then maybe that might be too deep. Again, kids are coming out of quarantine and who knows what they've seen, and a lot of trauma, because when I think about level two, I think about how that's going to address so many social emotional learning gaps that they have from not being with us as well over the summer. It may be too soon. We may need to go back. So feeling okay to move between the two and using these activities, not just to build community and culture, but to informally assess where your students are at a social emotional level right now, because we think about how we're going into the school year, like we all have goosebumps and we're all really overwhelmed and anxious. And you might get, you know, kids who are typically on the pass on sheet, very outgoing and love to chat, and are just like in a shell right now. And so never to stick to, and this goes for all of this work, never to stick to one plan. We know that we're teachers, things don't go as planned. But even with this work, I know people can be uneasy and they want to like, okay, here's a guide to doing the work. Let me push through it. Feel comfortable moving back. Feel comfortable starting with maybe just one layer two item, and then seeing what do the kids say to each other? How do they now start to create dialogue with you outside looking in? Remove yourself from the equation a little bit too in this work. So I love this activity, and then just how they both lend themselves to using them interchangeably.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, we thought through too, what we, you know, our job right now is really to build that community. So like, what can we learn about our students, even if it's uncomfortableness to be on camera or use their voice, and then allowing them to put whatever they wanted in chat. You know, we said, if they don't want to, you know, can they put it in chat? They can make whatever up they want, whatever item up they want. the point is that they have some control over their reality and the way they're expressing it, because we don't have control over those racial narratives always. But the practice of being able to claim it is what we're after at the beginning of the year. So this was a version that for little kids about, everybody does sort of the like me poem at the beginning of the year. So you could tell we've got beginning of the year on our brains. So, but we thought this is also an entry point into claiming your narrative. So one sort of oriented towards more the K2 set is that you make flowers. And I can imagine doing a template, you can make a flower and you can assemble the petals on like a seesaw platform. The way I've seen this done, of course, is with construction paper. So the translation is going to be any of your draw, your whiteboards or your Jamboards where you can create shapes and then assemble them. And then on it, you're going to write your text, and your text are your various identities. So here's some examples of things you can do. Favorite cartoon show, someone you look up to, and they're supposed to write something on each one. Now in real life, I've seen this activity where this lesson really is about claiming your identity, and then it's taking a step forward. So it's the about me, which we're celebrating everyone's, like I like this and this is who I am. But then taking it a step further and saying when someone else steps on your identity or your values or your ideas. So then it's that you lead kids through the exercise of saying, what happens when you say you don't like this thing? So you tear off, or you could darken out, or you could erase the petal when someone says, who cares? Or I don't believe. So then we're starting to create those norms in the classroom about how we are as in our own narratives. When you say, in our little microcosm community in our classroom, if you're stepping on someone, you're crushing someone's story. So the telling of the stories and the accepting of differences of the story and the appreciating of differences between us starts to train them in that sort of community and civil dialogue and kindness, really. So this was sort of a little kid version. And then we found this activity from the Teach for Tolerance Social Justice PD. It's linked in the slides. But this kind of mirrors the typical, Francisco does I am, everyone has sort of their templates of their I am poems at the beginning of the year. It's just sort of.
Do you mind if I pause you really quick, Angela? Because
Yeah.
There's two amazing questions in the question and answer right now that I was going to get ready to type up, and I'm like, let's talk about this.
Okay.
One of them was for the scavenger hunt. How would you modify the scavenger hunt for students who are homeless? And I think that we totally started a conversation about that yesterday, right? Where when we talk about the 2 layers you want, when you can get gray layer like that, when you know that kind of information, that's when you want to become so vague. So there were things like, what is your favorite item to go to sleep with, right? So we're not being specific to where you sleep, what are you doing? And everybody has something maybe they have with them. It can be the shirt they sleep in, or a pillow, or a little blankie, or a stuffed animal. What's your favorite possession you own, right? Because again, I think it's really important to understand that we know a lot of the stigma that comes with the students' circumstances, but when students are living in those circumstances, they don't always understand that their circumstances are so bad. They understand it's not like everybody else's, but they don't realize they're so different. So they do still take a lot of pride in certain things that they do have, and allowing them to just express that, I think, is what's going to be the most powerful to helping them claim their identity. Again, when I go back to my story where, somebody wanted me to be this or that, at the time, I didn't know there was anything different about me. I like, again, it's the only thing I knew. I had 2 different colored parents, but it was so different for the world. And I think if it had just been like my story versus somebody else's story, it wouldn't have been a problem. So I'm thinking like for our homeless students, allowing them to share as much as they want that they're comfortable with, but then, that's where you want to make the item choosing or the things that you're asking them to talk about really vague so they can go anywhere with that answer. And then one more, Angela or Francisco, I don't know if you want to answer for that same one. How about kinder? They don't vocalize as well as the older kids do for the scavenger hunt idea. Any thoughts on that? How you could get them to participate in something like that?
well, there in the scavenger hunt, so I didn't have any kids. I didn't, I left it pretty unstructured for my entry points. And I didn't have kids who chatted. I did have kids who didn't participate, and they were the blank screen. And, as an entry point, I didn't say one thing or other. I just really made a big deal of the ones who did show. And then, I just said what I saw, basically. So,
Assist them maybe through it.
Yeah.
Create some dialogue for them.
I can imagine doing this too as like, it doesn't necessarily have to be a real-time scavenger hunt either. It could be like a show and tell where everybody has a slide, and then they could put a picture of whatever slide they want. Like it's on Seesaw, you can import a picture pretty easily. And then kids could get a screenshot off the computer even if they want to. I had it wasn't the scavenger hunt, but I had an art activity, and the child lifted an actual picture of the thing that he was supposed to draw. And it was like, okay, what's going on here? Is he unable to? Is he unwilling to? Is he ashamed? I don't really know. But I took it and I just suggested, put a background on it. And then he put a rainbow background on it. But, the point is that he's interacting and he's interacting with me in some format.
Engaging, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, it's fine, the entry point, if the kids could, even if you show a picture and they could go a thumbs up and a thumbs down because they're really little and they can't do these things, I think that would probably be an extension piece. Like do you have something like this at your hand, and then they can sort of they might be able to participate at a more of a basic level?
Yeah, I would say I would just keep it towards to the first layer as best as possible. And then also try to give type of, we know that our students, even as early as 2 are reading. So maybe kind of giving context clues of either logos or something that they can really recognize, or something that is colorful that we might be able to give them as a hint so that they can bring on over. So we're also working on their listening skills, and it may not necessarily be going too much into the second layer, but I would focus more on the first layer.
Yeah. And I only did, I did the condiment, which ended up being a one, but I only did 3. I just figured I'd spread them out, and we might even do the same ones, or I might make riddles out of them. I'm not sure how we're going with it, but yeah, flexibility is our friend these days, because we're all making it up as we go. Okay, I'm going to move on to this. So here's the template. So this is actually an activity about self-identity. It's about your self-narrative. And we all kind of do the traditional one. What I thought was interesting was the second one, because then so on one day you're going to go through, and you can make your poems. You can pick one, you can pick all. There's a ton of variations. We've all seen them. But I think the interesting thing about this particular activity is then you start to evaluate what of your qualities that you said about yourself are invisible or visible to others. Because the other thing about racial narratives is the way you look. It's about the way you look and the way other people perceive you. And that's what we call as bias when it's racist. But so it's that unconscious bias. But this makes it just in terms of what is visible and what is invisible. So then we start to think about what, I'm kind. How come that person can't see that I'm kind? Oh, because they think everybody that looks like you is a hoodlum and a gangster and is about to kill them. So even though your narrative for yourself is that I'm a kind, sweet, brave person, when we start to connect what is visible and what is invisible, and then the bias of action after that, that's where we start heading into the meat of the work in terms of uncovering and dismantling and disrupting these racial narratives. How were you going to use this? Are you going to do the traditional poem, and do you think how soon do you think you're going to do the visible, invisible part, either one of you, when you do this?
I think that for me, beginning first with getting that first layer with just their answers of how they perceive themselves. And then after that, we can get a little bit more of a dialogue and conversation with students as to, okay, well, this is how you feel. Okay, well, why do you feel that way? And then after that, we can introduce the second part over here, whether if they're visible or invisible, But something else that might also lead to discussion is for kind of like how you were mentioning with the other flower activity, we can have an activity where students can write their name on a piece of paper, and then the entire class kind of does a gallery walk for every single student in the class, writing one positive comment or one positive affirmation, one positive descriptor about that student that doesn't have to do with any physical reflection of themselves. And so that can turn into kind of like a positive slam book as well, seeing what other people see about themselves.
Yeah, we thought of the anti-biased because it was so negative. It was like, I don't like this. Okay, your flower goes down. So I really love it. I'm totally going to use this idea of that, of the, okay, what do other people see in you? And especially because you might not see it in yourself. I can't tell you how many times I tell a kid, that was really smart. And they're like, I'm not smart. And then I get all offended. I'm like, who's the professional here? I'm the one who went to school to say whether you're smart or not. If I say you're smart, I'm the one who gets paid to say that. So don't be dissing on my profession now. And then they go, okay, I'm smart, I'm sorry. So yeah, I like that. It's the positive building of the bias, because this is going to take some conversation about what's visible. And I think that this activity is going to lend itself to a lot of conversations. And then here's where the real conversation goes for the third layer of this is here's my narrative of how I conceive myself and how I feel and what my beliefs are. Here's what other people can see when they see me. Well, they can see I'm tall, but they can't see I'm kind. So then how do we make visible the kindness? What are the body signals? I mean, you can have all kinds of age appropriate conversations about how we are as a group in community, and what is visible and what's invisible, and how do we make things visible? Well, you can say words, you can smile, there are things you can do. But this third layer is really where our books start to come in, and that's where the heavy lifting is what do other people see in you that is not there? And that's where we come up with those biases, those stereotypes, and so on. I had an experience it was actually at Summer Institute where we were, we were sharing, it's at UCLA, so we're sharing it, and there's all these summer programs going on. And there happened to be a summer program, and I think they were like an exchange from like Taiwan or an Asian, so there was a lot of little Asian kids running around. And one of the teacher colleagues of mine said, oh, there must be a science or math workshop going on in the summer. And I was kind of like, I didn't see any books. So she saw this in these children based on some sort of narrative that she had in her head that all these Asian kids are here. There must be a science project going on, because there was nothing visible there. No books, no nothing, like there was no other information to base it on. So that's the point at which we can start discussing the books, because the books provide us with other kinds of narratives, and then we can start to explore when is it that someone else is saying a narrative for you or for the character, and how do we relate to that in our world, because it's all about connecting to this the character, whether they look like you or they don't look like you, and each other in real life, because if it's not affecting real life, why are we doing this? So what book are you launching, my friends?
I'm going to be starting with Ghost Boys. How about you, Vanessa?
Same. And I'm super excited about it also because, we've been having our discussions as groups of fifth grade teachers at our site. And I've got like everybody on board to do it. I had a coworker who, the minute I mentioned it and just kind of talked about it, she found it on her Kindle and texted me at like 10 o'clock that night and was like, I read the entire book already. I'm crying. I'm this. I have chills. I can't wait. I'm loving it. And I'm like, oh my God, yes. Because there's just something about, working with people who are ready to do the work, even whether or not they know how to do the work yet. And I just think that, I have it right here, this book lends itself so well to exactly what Angela said, when we all were fans. This was not sponsored by Joel Parker Rhodes or anything.
No,
She just
we came up
perfectly.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
that
we really
that
thought that this was the right. I mean, as we were doing this this presentation, and we've done this presentation before. By the way, you can look it up on the CTA YouTube. There's a Takeover Tuesday where we did another version of this. But we were throwing out all the books, like our most loved books. So you see on the presentation, and there's more in the slides. We put tons of book suggestions based on, like, you know, real teacher use, that these are good books to use. But we all universally said, you know what, this year we're going to start off with Ghost Boys, just because it really addresses a lot of the what's going on right now with Black Lives Matter and people getting shot, innocent people getting shot. And
yeah, when we talk about the trauma that the students might come into from being in isolation, we have to also talk about the trauma that's happening in real communities. It's happening on the news. And if we have communities, especially like the ones that I teach in, where their families don't understand those communities that they're seeing these things happen to, we have to help them make sense of the world around them. That's another huge, I think, responsibility that we have as educators in the classroom. And like we like to say in our district, we're in the business of saving lives. And this book, I think, done right, which we're crafting out a Google Classroom that you can follow along with as well, on how to do it, you know, the work gradually. Really, like Angela said, you know, that I am poem about what's visible, what's not, and then what's not true about you. This book just so beautifully shows what that looks like in real time. You know, when she mentioned, they see I'm tall, but they don't see that I'm kind. It's exactly what happens to Jerome in the book. And I just think, I don't know what better way to start the year, you know, with a solid lens of dismantling racial narratives on top of helping the world right now make more sense for our kids in the best way possible.
Yeah. There's a lot of so let's jump into the book. So you got a little taste of it. The premise of the book is that it's told from a child's perspective. He's is he a fifth grader or sixth grader? He's about our age.
He's 11, 12. Oh, you went mute, Angela. I don't know what happened.
There.
Yeah, Jerome's in middle school.
Jerome's in middle school, but I mean, I taught sixth grade, so I remember he was around the age, and he's shot by the police, and it's told from his perspective as a ghost. He is the ghost boy, and he interacts with all the other ghost boys throughout history, because this is not the first one, and it's not been the last. It will not be the last one. We will try to make it the last one as much as we can by doing this work, but and it intersects, and here's the interesting thing, it intersects with the narrative of the daughter of the policeman who's the same age. So you get these opposing standpoints of, you know, the little white girl who's the same age, who's the daughter of her father, who knows her father's a kind, good protector, and then the ghost. And then you see the interplay between, and it goes between alive and dead, and you start to really have these narratives come into play. By the way, my colleagues also are down for teaching with me on this. So we'll have a cadre of people on the to read this with us and explore the book with us. So
and no, I was just saying in the chat really quick, because we knew this would come up too. K1 book title recommendations, right?
Yeah, I put a ton of them. I put extra ones, and we'll get into some lower grade ones. And what we tried to do, but they're in. We put a ton of resources and lists for all the grade levels, and the particularly strong ones in terms of racial narratives. And we kind of tried to highlight them in some of the slides, and you'll get I think the slides are in the chat, or you should have been sent the slides. But we tried to pick some activities too that were universal activities. So if you're not going to choose this boy, I mean, you can choose Ghost Boys. You can choose lots of different. These are universal activities that can go with any literature. That's what I meant to say. So hashtag, you guys explain it. First version.
So with hashtag it, something that we've done before is usually I like to model to my students, like how do I mark my book, right? I have all these little sticky notes everywhere so that they know that, you know, we're going to be close reading. And so I'll pick a certain passage from a book that we're currently reading. And so this is the example that I have here in front of you. So as I'm explaining the activity, maybe you've done it before. Usually I've done this with whiteboards, but since we're in distance learning for now, one thing that we could use is we could use a Padlet, we could use a Google Doc or a Pear Deck, or you can even do it right here in the chat. So here we have our first passage from Ghost Boy's quote. On parent night, if Eddie has to speak Spanish to his mom, he covers his mouth and whispers. He thinks speaking Spanish in school isn't cool. He makes faces when his mom tries to talk with his teachers. I wish I could speak another language. Hola is all I know. Truth is, I have enough trouble speaking the right words in English and not having crews like Eddie, Snap, and Mike picking on me, saying stuck up, teacher's pet, all because I don't act bored, disrespectful in class, or pushy out at recess. I wish I were done with middle school. I get tired of dreaming about how life's going to be different when I grow up. Right now, it's stupid, stupid, stupid. So in this activity, I would ask my students to write a hashtag that would describe how Jerome is feeling at this moment.
Let's see if
And
they
so,
can do hashtag.
if
So
they can
go
do a
ahead and
hashtag
hashtag it. You can hashtag it and put it in the chat. So, you know, and sometimes you have a kid who you have to explain what a hashtag is, but most of them
Know what a hashtag is.
They know what a hashtag is, but hashtags really can capture
Oh,
theme.
okay.
You
I
know,
like
in terms
reading
of
these.
literary things, you know, I
Is that
tell
from
them
Fed
it could
Up?
be a theme, it could be a topic, it could be
Over it.
your take
So
on
done.
something. Do we have good ones?
Reality check, yeah. One's Fed Up. The other one's just hashtag middle school, right? Love it. And that's a great, if a kid said that, I would go on a whole tangent, right? Like, let's talk about that. What does that really mean? That's heavy, right? There's a lot of unpacking. Over it, so done. Reality check. Beam me up, Scotty. Get me out of here, right? Not equal. Yeah.
Okay, so in my class, if I were going to have this, so Francisco said the first step would be to collect these hashtags, like they're collecting the hashtags. This, by the way, you can, like, we picked a particular passage, so you can control how much you want to hashtag. We've done this as chapters and then done it as a review. We've done it with where there's something that we particularly want to discuss. So, you know, beyond the hashtag is the academic discussion. So like someone said, what was it? Unequal. I think the last one you said was like unequal, or it wasn't fair. So, you know, if you see a particularly good one, or you can do it at random, but I tend to pick ones and then ask them. So that's, you know, we're discussing the hashtag. Why did you put that? And kids will say, well, it's not fair that he has to da-da-da-da-da, and when he has to do this, when Eddie has to speak Spanish, why should he have to translate? Well, that's an academic discussion with the text's evidence, is what ends up happening when you start to use those hashtags as discussion points. And I actually game my version of this. We do, so I also do hashtags, but we do it in brackets. So I end up, after we have the discussions, I end up having them either in groups, or, you know, your configurations could be different, but they have to agree on a hashtag between them. So that already gives a layer of discussion. Well, I think it's this because blah, 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 blah. Well, they're reviewing, they all did the same passage. So they're getting their different, you're basically, it's a way of tricking them into doing an academic discussion around a passage. And then, but they come to an agreement, and then we, you know, then we battle, and they can vote, you know, and you could probably vote using Pear Deck or one of the polls kind of things, tech tools. But what it ends up doing is having them redefine, and because we're grounding it in the text, they have to go back and show evidence of in the text on why they think that, or they could be synthesizing stuff, or the real meat comes when they're saying a hashtag that it's their take on it. Like, beam me up, Scotty. Okay, that's like, it's a little humorous, it's a little sarcastic, and you have to have some cultural reference. So there's like you said, Vanessa, there's some unpacking that has to happen there.
And then also, I think that's where, you know, the social emotional learning opportunities come into. So they, you know, both panelists talked about two different ways to use it. Another way that I like to use it is just, you know, do the read, whether it's one chapter, two chapters, and kind of using it as a check-in with your kids, holding them accountable. Sometimes I let them know ahead of time, we're going to do hashtag at the end. And then I end up getting like where they stop in the middle of a read aloud or something. And that's the reminder of what, you know, resonates with them. And then I get a check-in with my kids of how they're feeling about the story or about the book, or what's sitting with them, or what's, you know, and you get an array of where the students had really sticking points for themselves within the read aloud. And then again, that's where you get to informally assess where you're meeting your students where they are with this work too, right? something that maybe stood out to one student was super superficial to another student, but then that means your work needs to be done with that other student because that might have some background information to it of something he's dealing with in that moment, right? So it lends itself to academics and then, you know, the social emotional lens too. And also I read in here in the comment, there was something, oh, how would the students post their hashtags? So you could do it exactly like you guys did in the chat. You could put a slide up and you could be typing in, you unmute kids one at a time, I'm thinking, and they could just give the hashtag and mute them back and you could be typing. And then, you know, just depending on how much time you want to allot to it, you could do a lot of things with them once they're up there on a board, on a slide, right? Maybe put them in chronological order of, like if you're doing the entire chapter, I chose this because of this piece, this because of this piece of the chapter, and that mine was from this piece of the chapter, and then kind of see how the story plays out over time, right? How they kind of come together as one bigger picture.
What I usually
go ahead.
Well, what I usually do is like I do. It's like low effective filter to beginning. So the I think the answer is it could be a range of things. The first one would be oral, because the initial thing is you want them to talk. You want them to be able to claim it. So this is my hashtag. So I would either have them say it or just put it in the chat. But ultimately what we want to lead to is academic writing. So once we get it in writing, then they can start doing defense. So if we were having them doing it writing, I think Francisco mentioned it, like maybe a Google Doc, a shared Padlet, Jamboard. They could put their hashtag on a sticky note on a Jamboard, something like that. So moving from the oral discussion of it into the articulating it on paper. But the first part, I'd probably do it just orally or on chat, where it doesn't live forever. But and then the quote war is kind of a variation of this. You want to one of you want to explain it?
I'll explain one version of it. So for the quote war, kind of thinking of like a four square, right? This one's when we're talking about the storyboard, right? Yeah, you could.
Yeah, the storyboard's our favorite version of it.
Yeah. So storyboard's my favorite version of it too. Kind of jigsawing up certain parts of the text, right? Giving them certain sections as groups, modeling how to find a quote, all those things, and then having the students maybe choose quotes from certain sections of the chapter that resonate with them. It could be a group of 4, it could be a breakout room in your Zoom session, and each one of them, you know, has a different page, or you could put all the one pager, like page 1, you're in one breakout room, you guys come up with a quote that really sums up this part of the chapter or the book. You could do it by multiple chapters over a long period of time, and then have the students really defend why that is the most resounding quote or the overall idea of the page or the chapter, and then let each group report and start to see maybe how detailed or not detailed maybe the different pages of the book are to different students, or again, what students got out of certain chapters over a few chapters at a time, and put it into a bigger picture and how, you know, one event leads to another. And then you're talking about, you know, text sequence, and then you're talking about foreshadowing, that kind of stuff comes out in the conversation too, right? So having, again, that academic connection to standards, because we know we are teaching something as well, but tapping into what they're getting out of it as far as what opportunities is it lending itself to dismantling the narratives possibly happening within the chapters and the pages.
And another variation that we could do this as a group is that we could do the Foursquare storyboard as well as a chapter retell, where the students would pick a line from the specific chapter in their working groups or breakout room, and they would retell that chapter according to their line and their drawing. So they're retelling the events in the chapter along with a visual representation as well. And so within that work, they're going to be discussing and engaging in academic discourse so that they can present their chapter retell in the most coherent way that they possibly can. A more extended version would be to do it with the entire class, where you can give each group a specific chapter, and then we could play it as a slideshow, or we could also do it as a jigsaw or a bracket as well.
Yeah. One quick thing I want to answer live here, because I know we're running out of time, but a lot of them are, do you give the kids the physical book? There's like 4 questions of that. And so just to my mind, what I did in the spring, right now I've had a lot more time to think about it, but even in the spring, record yourself reading a chapter on Flipgrid, right? It can give you 10 minutes, post it in Seesaw or Google Classroom, have the students listen to it, they can write in the comments, or decide to talk about that chapter during your next Zoom meeting and do it orally. And then again, like Angela said, transition it into the writing about it as well. So you don't necessarily need a copy for every student. You don't necessarily need the students to be reading along with you. They don't need to see the text, because again, I think that the big piece of this is that we are using storytelling and books to bring in other cultures and other experiences and do that work of dismantling the narratives. But it's just a bonus that these activities could lend themselves to academic conversations and those kind of things as well. That's kind of the bonus, but if you can get the kids the books and those types of things, that would be amazing. But I think that the real piece is always keeping those glasses on, that really the work is about what experiences and exposures and ideas and stories or storytelling are we helping students do about different cultures and themselves. And then just, the added bonus that we can tie in all the other work that we need to do as educators as well.
And connecting it, and I like what you said about connecting it back to the students. So it's exploring those racial narratives, but we always want to connect it back to their own experience and what's shared and what's understood. So the next activity is a meme activity, and it's sort of a riff on it where it's basic. You have to capture that you gotta commiserate with the character really in order to make a joke about it or to make an image or something equivalent. So it's really showing, do they understand it? And I think most people understand this version of it. But finding memes, it's not always appropriate. You might have to be a little bit careful about the passage you do. I just want to really quickly go over some of the lower grade ones because we're running out of time. And these are, of course, all available on the slide. So there's a lot of links and things also to other activities. So we put more in the slides than we can cover. But for little kids, it's really about expressing it. It's the telling of the story and the celebrating of the differences. So making individual lottery cards based on their own, expressions of their reality is one activity. You can do books like you reimagine for yourself. And then we have some book, and so these are some of the book samples.
Separate as Never Equal is an amazing one to start with. That's a picture book, and it's also good enough for the fifth graders. My fifth graders love that book so much.
Yeah, so
it intersects struggles, right, too, that the first desegregated schools actually happened surrounding Hispanic students in California before Brown versus Board of Education. So if you're doing cross-cultural comparisons too, that book can be a great one for younger kids, and then it lends itself to the older grades too.
Right. So there's a bunch of resources in here. There's some extra lists for kids of for grade levels of all ages, and then some more ideas. So we've got some resource pages in there, and some things just to think about is that it's teachable. Kids are going. The entry point into this, and the difficult thing is, what if I make a mistake, or what if my kid says something? Like, people want to avoid the conflict, and it's the opposite, that we need to talk about it so that we don't have the conflicts. So to be brave and to be accepting and to keep at it. And we're going to invite you to continue this conversation, because we need support. If you're fearful about any of those things, about making a pitfall, and reluctant to enter and read a book about this, then I invite you to continue with this conversation with us, and there's other people, and continue to learn about it. And then what we want for our kids to do when they're thinking about their racial narratives, they're able to identify and own their own narrative, is that we want to start connecting it to what's happening now in real life, because we want it to be transformative. We want them to be able to do something about it and step in and be anti-racist themselves and be upstanders in appropriate ways. And so we invite you, and that's a definite next journey piece. We weren't even going to go here because we were really concentrating sort of on the entry points. But with that, we're going to invite you to continue this conversation with us. On the Google, we made a Google Classroom. You have to use your
non-work
Gmail. You have to use your individual Gmail, and the class code is in the corner. So
and this PowerPoint is in fact linked in the slides, but if it gets lost, I made a bit.ly/IPD talking color, and I'll put it again right now. you
So,
can
and
continue.
that's a place where we can continue the conversation, and as you go, or even if you just want to keep learning about it and you're not ready to launch, that's okay too. You can be a lurker, because this is a lifetime. I mean, if this was an easy thing, we wouldn't be in this situation right here. I also I have another homework for you, another next step. So yes. So we're talking about being an anti-racist in our classrooms, but I wanted you to take a bigger step and to flex your constituent rights and support Prop 15 in any way. Tell your neighbors. If every single one of us told our mom or dad, our neighbor, and our brothers, and we would get these things passed. So it's a tax equity, and it means it is a huge equity issue with schools. We all know this. We all know this reality. I don't need to tell you about it, but that's another big step for you all to really practice being an anti-racist. We thank you for being with us on this Monday, learning about this, and we know it was really rushed, so continue to have these conversations. There's more to this series, and there are past series that have been linked. We don't have time for Q&A. We have book lists, places for you to buy the book, and then our contact information in case you do want to reach out to us individually.
Please reach out. Please reach out.
We are at 4:31.
Woo!
And that's the bell. The bell has rung.
Right.
School is out.
Yes.
Marlene or Brian, do you have any closing things from Mothership to say?
We
Nope.
actually appreciate every one of you for being here, and we mostly appreciate our presenters for sharing how culturally relevant pedagogy could look in the classroom and how to integrate that and using books as a process. And there were quite a few questions about appropriate grade level books, but I believe that information is in the slides. Vanessa put on the chat where you could find it, and it's also in the Eventbrite registration site. And you just go to the Monday offering today, and you can open up the handout there. Also, some of you asked for a certificate of completion so that you can get the hours in your district. That is also in the Eventbrite site, and you just look for just click where it says I want a certificate, and it will be sent out to you probably by the end of the week when we end this series. So we invite you to continue the rest of this week. We have additional webinars on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I'm not sure, Angela, is there a slide there for them to see?
For the rest of the
For the rest of the week?
Oh, I didn't know. I don't think they put in the slide.
Well, you can see that on Eventbrite, but if, I don't know if any of you have time to hang around for a few minutes. Because you might have, there are some questions that people might be anticipating some answers to. So can we give about 10 minutes to answering some questions, if you don't mind? And if the participants, if you have to go, we appreciate your time. If you want to hang around and hear some of the questions being asked of the presenters, you're welcome to hang around for the next 10 minutes. So one of the questions that we had here is asking about Spanish versions of the books or any suggestions for Spanish authors, books that are written in Spanish. Francisco, you want to take that?
Yeah, I would just say BMI, if you look, BMI books, they usually do a lot of translation for different types of books. I know that in my personal experience, I've been able to find Bud Not Buddy. I've been able to find The Circuit Breaking Through.
Those Big Decision, that one's in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's some there's been more lower grade. In fact, there's been a lot of picture books written in Spanish. Dreamers is written in, so for the lower grades, Dreamers written in Spanish.
Yeah, a lot of the Christopher Paul Curtis books, so the Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, some of the Rita Williams Garcia books, I was able to find them in Spanish as well. I don't remember the exact acronym, I can try and look for it right now, but BMI, they do hardback binding as well in the Spanish translations.
And Gary Soto has also written books in Spanish.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's weird getting books to kids right now, though, because we're not sure. Like, we were told that if we give books, to not get them back, like they're infected forevermore.
Yeah.
So
'Cause
that
we
was
have
one
the
of the
idea
other
why-
questions is, do you provide the books for the students? Like, do you provide them for the students, or does the school site purchase them for you?
So
I was gonna say I can man that because that was like my whole thing last year. There's like a couple ways to do it, but then you can talk about equity too. Yeah. So donors choose, man, I did at least like 3 or 4 of those last year. And honestly, multicultural literature is like the easiest project on donors choose to get funded. Absolutely. Like, it was my quickest ones. I've done a lot of projects, and anything with literature, literacy, talking about real-time issues, like Chevron just bought the whole project a couple times. I think like Safeway bought the whole project. A lot of people are in the business right now of buying books for classrooms. We understand. And then I just think like maybe you want to talk about like your equity team, maybe that idea, Angela. I don't know if you want to charge other equity teams with that.
Yeah, so CTA, one of the other hats I wear for CTA is as an equity team, and we have a budget, which, you know, we usually do on membership engagement. But so we have we're asking for buying the books for every student to have one. The issue, I mean, there's 2 things. One is getting the books, like donors choose and things like that. The other is just access at this point because of the pandemic. But just for this immediate year, I did what Vanessa did and did Flipgrid shorts and did reading it, and I recorded it. And then, and I think Francisco, you also did the read aloud, and you showed the kids with another doc-cam, right? The text, so that there was a read aloud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did those read alouds, but I have a lot of class sets at my site, and I think that when now moving forward, since I have a lot of accessible books, I'm gonna make them available so that students can come pick them up. In the past before, we've usually been pretty good about asking our admin to, if there's money in the budget, to provide class sets. So I think 2 years ago, we were able to get class sets of Bud Not Buddy and Walk to Moons and Number the Stars as well. I think getting those books funded on Donors Choose is also a really good option as well.
Because I also think, again, like, it was like what I mentioned before, that also the biggest piece of this is having at least one copy for you, right, to do the work and to do the read alouds like Angela and I talked about on the Flipgrid. And I mentioned Donors Choose because I didn't go on Donors Choose for class sets. I didn't receive class sets from Donors Choose. What I did was like literally the slides here that we've shared with you, I put every single one of those book titles in a Donors Choose, and I got like 60 different books. And so I think that that's the really rich part of it too, is for you to have a lot of things at your arsenal to use while doing this work, right? And then also, if we return to traditional classroom, having a lot of these books available for students to literally pick up and just read. Because it doesn't always have to be us leading the conversation or manning the charge. It's really about being able to put experience in a student's hands and then just let them get experience to things also. It doesn't have to always be a lesson. We definitely wanted to give you tons of resources and ways you could use them explicitly in your classroom. But I think what we also need to focus on doing in our classrooms is shifting what our literature and our stories look like in general, because then, like Angela said, hopefully we won't have to do so much of this work. And that will be because we are raising children who are used to seeing, an African-American character in 7 different books, being 7 different, career, right? Or an antagonist, a protagonist, a sidekick, a main character. Like, that is the goal. That really is the goal, because all those things make our workload like less, and we don't have to do so much work to change narratives, and that they just exist for the students in the space that they spend most of their time in. So
another possibility are the open source materials that you could use to supplement what is in the traditional textbooks that your districts purchase, but the open source area is free, and you can copy whatever you need, and without charge. So they're materials that could complement the topics that you're teaching as additional information for your culturally relevant pedagogy, as to sticking to what the textbook is saying. So whether it's a novel or a history, open source is probably a good source of materials. And also the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
They collect a lot of information and record a lot of historical facts and information that you could download from the Library of Congress. So I think I think a lot of the questions had to do with, how do you get the copies of the books, and what do you do if here's one that's interesting. What do you do if you don't hashtag and Twitter? So how do you get involved in that process? Angela, you mentioned the hashtagging and posting on Twitter. So if a teacher doesn't do that, are there alternatives?
Yeah, you can do, the variation of that is like it's really like write a new a chapter title. Like if you were going to write if this was its own little chapter, title it, because it serves the same function. And I actually tell them, hashtags are a text feature, right? It has its own genre. And so we actually unpack it. I unpack it as a literary, it can serve as a commentary. What was that?
And
punctuation mark.
Yeah.
It is.
Emphasis, your take on it, you're making a connection to it,
I think it started on Twitter. It started on Twitter to be technical, right? But it lives everywhere now. I have an entire board in my classroom who have our current event articles, and sometimes the one engagement they need to do with one of the articles for the week is fill in a hashtag, like a little digital drawing of a hashtag, and they need to put as many one-liners in there that retell the article. So it's really just kind of like an umbrella term for one-liners or summaries.
So I do make a file label, or make it really the one that everyone understands is make a chapter title, because everyone understands that. So that's the variation.
Great.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to actually live on Twitter.
Yeah.
So one last question. There were a couple of questions, Francisco, asking about the differentiation or the distinction between Latino, Latina, and Latinx.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's also a personal usage of the term. And so I personally use that term, because Spanish has a engendered language with O's and A's. So if you put a room full of powerful, women, and then I walk in the room, now it's a room full of Latinos. It's no longer a room full of Latinas, or you know what I'm saying? So it's a very male gendered language. So that's one. There's another version of it, or there's another reason of it as well, is because one, I don't think I can claim to be indigenous, although I am native, or to this continent. I know that there is so much intersectionality with that. I am also Mexican and Latino, so I can't claim a Chicano identity. And so because there's all these different intergenerational factors that really play into it, I think that Latinx is a more inclusive term of folks who don't identify with either the gender binary, or who are also kind of, in a sense, resisting linguistically to the Eurocentric colonization of language throughout the world.
Preach, Francisco.
What's interesting about those whole things is when you start, there's a whole other conversation, maybe for high school kids, but it's the labeling and the unpacking, because labels themselves have racial narratives connected, right? That have political, and there are all these other intersex and sort of agendas playing when we start talking about, well, are you Mexican? Are you Chicano? Are you Latinx? And then there's a narrative behind that too. So, language is fascinating.
And there's one in here that just popped up from somebody. What books do you recommend for adults to read to expand understanding of diversity and cultures? And I think that's so important, because remember we were talking earlier, like yesterday about how does this translate into work teachers may need to do as well, right? Us adults, since we didn't get this work in the classroom. I know off the top of my head, just because I know it can be heavy to read about some things and it's not exactly diversity or culture, but like starting with Stamped, which is the blended book by Jason Reynolds and Ibram R. Kendi. Like, it's in kids friendly term, and not only will it help you could read it with your kids, to be honest, because he has like jokes and informal language in there, but it will really help you understand the trajectory of like how racism continued to live on in this country for so long. If you're not ready for something like white fragility or how to be an anti-racist, right? That one I just love because it's a feel good. It's a feel good. I think it'll get you ready to start talking about the issues, and it'll at least like give you a launching pad to understand and start maybe pointing out some racial narratives that you start to see. But if anybody else has like suggestions, yeah, saturate her in the chat, or you guys, if you have some specific ones.
I would say We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolition is Teaching in the Pursuit of Educational Freedom by Bettina Love. That is fantastic. And also Teaching Community by Bell Hooks is also one of my favorites.
And I was going to say the Kendi book, and How to Be an Anti-Racist Teacher.
How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that's written by the guy who remixed Stamped with Jason Reynolds, right? So they're all on the same, like, I know I have the two too. I could, oh my God, and that one too, the history of Latinx and African American. That one's my favorite as well. Yeah, totally.
Okay, you guys, I think we just spent another 10, 15 minutes on this. So I think I need to conclude this webinar. This will not be the end all of the webinars on cultural relevancy and cultural competency, and also culturally sustaining pedagogy. So, you know, whatever happens in our school lives, our professional lives, there's a sustainability of what we learn and apply, and it becomes a sustainable part of our teaching repertoire. So thank you, everyone. We will let you know. We will have another series come September, and we'll let you know the topics at that time. But if you started school, you know, we welcome you back and hope that things will be working out fine for you. We know there's going to be challenges. And if you haven't started yet, we would welcome your comments and suggestions and how you even foresee what this new year is going to look like. So thank you again. We'll see you at the next webinar tomorrow, and you will be invited in just like you did today. So thank you. Have a good
Happy
day,
New Year,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.